So I've made bread 6 times so far, and this will be the 7th time. And I feel pretty comfortable showing you how I'm doing this now. I've had some challenges from day one. The first thing I'll say that is if you want to make real bread at home, and I call it real bread because I don't add yeast or anything. It's just flour, water, and starter. And the yeast comes from the starter. If you want to make real bread from home, do yourself a favor and get yourself a little digital scale, because everything's done in grams. You don't have to have it. You can do it in cups and ounces and all that. And I tried it myself the first couple of times, but it's made it a whole lot easier just to use a digital scale that you can zero out. It makes it really, really simple. All right, so what I have in here, I'll pull down my instructions here because this is the same recipe I've been using, is I started with 75 grams of my starter. And I haven't fed this starter, by the way. I just mixed it up really good to make sure that the hooch, the watery liquid part on the top, was mixed in really well. 75 grams of that starter, 55 grams of all-purpose flour, and 20 grams of rye flour. All the flour that I've used from the starter and all the flour that I'm using now to make the bread is all organic. And I got a pretty good deal on some organic flour. So rye flour is a huge, huge issue from what I can tell as far as giving the yeast enough vitamins and minerals to feed on to really make this thing work. So 75 grams of my starter, 55 grams of all-purpose flour, and 20 grams of rye flour. Added to that, 75 grams of warm water. And what we have created here is a starter that we've just fed. So basically, at this point, I'm going to do nothing with this but take it and put it up on a warm shelf in the house. And you probably won't have to deal with this if you're in a home, but being in the trailer here, I have to put it somewhere a little bit warmer than just the counter because my countertop is just a little too cool. I used a rubber band here to mark the top of where this fed starter is at right now. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for it to double. But I found that if I let it double and just start to collapse, it's no different than if I let it double and let it completely collapse, as long as I use it within a day, within 24 hours. So basically that's all there is to this first page or this first thing. So why would you want to make your own bread? Well, for me, the flavor is just incredible. It's mind-blowing how good the flavor is on this bread. This is not my recipe. I got this recipe off of YouTube, but I don't remember eating this much bread in years. And it's nice to have, bread and butter when the bread just is so much flavorful. The cost is so much cheaper. The wait time, though, you've got to kind of figure out a system, and I think I've got a system in place here. So this bread, right now, it is 20 minutes to 2 in the afternoon on Monday. I'm going to mix this on Tuesday, and I'm not going to bake it till Wednesday because there's a lot of resting stages in there. Physically, there's not a whole lot of work that you have to do with this. It's super, super simple. And my cost per loaf for the quality of bread that I'm getting, it's about $1.25, maybe $1.50 a loaf to make this. $1.50 for anybody who doesn't understand the buck term. So $1.50 American to make this. To buy this same loaf of bread at the store here in Alaska would cost me close to $6. So just yummy, yummy, yummy good. And we're going to go ahead and put this thing to rest. And then we'll come back tomorrow and I'll show you the next part after I get off of work. So it's the next morning. I'm getting ready to go to work here. Bring this up so you can see it. And there's the rubber band. And that's how much this is risen. In fact, I'll pull the lid off so you can see what the top looks like here. That is fermentation goodness right there. So there's no yeast in there. You saw everything I put in there. I put the starter in, and I put the flour in, and I put the water in. And that's all that's in there, and that thing is a little more than doubled in size. So when we come home from work today, we will go ahead and do the next stage. Okay, we are on the next day now of the bread recipe. So in here, right here, I've got 350 grams of all-purpose flour. And then I've got 50 grams of rye flour. And again, I'm adding the rye flour. You can use whole wheat flour. You can use whatever kind of flour you want. But use a whole grain flour to mix with it. It adds a ton more flavor and gives the yeast, the starter, a lot more food to feed off of. And then I've got 300 or 275 grams of water right here. And this is warmed water because my flour is pretty cold. So for this stage, I'll line you back up here. This is called the hydration stage. And the first thing I always do is blend my flours together, so I get a good dispersion of, or a good mix, blend of the different grains together. What you want to do here is you want to add your water. Let me grab my fancy dancy scraper. You want to add your water and let this rest before you add your starter on top of it for about 30 minutes. There's a lot of recipes that call for longer rests, but in reality, this one has 30 minutes has pretty much worked for me. And I'm using warm water on this because I want this final dough to not be cold. And while I store the rye flour up here in the cupboard, I store the organic all-purpose flour back in the back storage room where it's much colder. So all I'm going to do to the top of this now, comes with a handy dandy lid. I'm going to pop the lid on there. And then again, I'm going to take this whole bowl and I'm going to set it up over on the top over here, just because it's much warmer up there than it is right in this area here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to rest this for about 30 minutes. See what we got? Well, I'm going to take that now, and I'm going to stir that up and get all the air bubbles out of it and make sure it's well blended together, because this is going to be the next stage. I want it to be nice and smooth. It's got a nice sour taste to it, or nice sour smell to it. And then on this, I'm going to need 75 grams of this to go into the bread that I made. So turn our handy dandy scale back on. Zero it out. And we're going to pour 75 grams into this. And I actually end up going a little bit heavier than that, about 80, just because I know I'm going to lose some in the container. There we go. So that little bit of starter right there is what's going to make all of that, or make that bread produce the gas that will give it the lift. All the starter is a live, ready-to-go yeast culture. Just a little bit. We'll do all we need. Double check and make sure I got the right recipe here, or the right formula. 75 grams of fed starter. We have one other final ingredient, and I might as well do that on the scale while we're here. I'm going to zero that out. And you can use any kind of salt you want, but don't use iodized salt. I went and picked up some sea salt crystals, and I'm going to need 14 grams. And salt is the very last ingredient you put into the bread, because salt has an adverse effect on yeast, and it'll stop the yeast from rising. So we're going to do the initial fold in of the starter, and then when we're done doing the fold in of the starter, we're going to do the we're going to let it rest again, and then we're going to add the salt. We're going to stretch it out, fold it all back together, and let it rest again. So now we're just going to go through a series of folds, and I've done anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 different folds during the rest period, but it hasn't really made that much of a difference so far that I've seen. Okay, so just so you can see here, not much difference, right? It didn't do anything, but it is nice and moist. Now we're going to take our starter, or 75 grams of starter. We're going to put that right in on top of this dough. And then all we're going to do, this is where you really get your fun. Spread that around the top of that dough, kind of dimple it in. You want a good mix here. That's what you're after. Then we're going to pull that dough out and stretch it over. We're going to pull that dough out and just keep stretching it over. And when you're doing this, try not to break the dough. All you're trying to do right now is just mix everything together. It smells delicious. It smells incredible, I'm telling you. When you do this yourself, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. With my scraper over here. So basically, we'll smash it down a little bit here. All I've done is mixed that starter right into that flour and water mixture that we had. And then you are done again for about another half an hour. So basically this mix rest routine replaces having to knead the bread. So having to work it on the counter. You're stretching it, you're letting it rest, you're stretching it, you're letting it rest, and you're letting it do its thing naturally. So let me bring you over here and show you what we got. Same ball of dough, right? It's softened up a tad bit more just by sitting up there. And now I'm going to, let's see if I could put this right here. I'm going to sprinkle this sugar or the salt, and you can use fine salt. Just make sure that the salt that you use is not iodized, okay? Because the iodized salt will really mess you up. Then you need a little bit of water on our fingers, and this will just help dissolve the crystals as we do the same thing, right? We're just pushing it back in again and dimpling that dough. And then, just like we did before, grab your dough, pull it, and fold it over, okay? Grab your dough, pull it, and fold it over. And again, we don't have to do this a lot. We're just doing this to get everything kind of mixed in. And then I just put all the folded edges down underneath so we have a nice smooth edge to work with on top. Get a little water on my fingers here. And then I'm going to smash it back out again, just because it's a lot easier to stretch when we get to that stage. Then we're going to just let this rest again for another hour. All right, so we've got bubbles appearing on the top here. And now we need to do the final thing that we're going to do with this dough. And I was going to wait until the morning to do this, but I can get this started right now. Oh, we need a vessel for the dough to rise in. And for that, since I don't have what's called a banneton that is designed for bread to rest in, I've been using this. So I just take a towel, excuse me, and lay it in the pan. And then I'm going to dust it with flour. So let's get that part done real quick. And the reason why you dust it with flour is because you don't want this moist dough to stick to the towel. Finally got a little chilly out there too. It's 19 degrees. Okay. So for this last time, then I'm going to do the stretch and fold. Cheat here, get a little flour. Pull it out. And I'm trying to do this so that it doesn't collapse all of the gas that's starting to form in this loaf. And so that it maintains a little bit of tension in here in the outside of the dough. Then we lay that right in this pan. And then I'm going to just kind of, if there's any seams here, I'm going to kind of pinch them together. And then we're going to pop a lid on here. Now, what I've been doing in the past, and I'm going to do something a little different this time, so wish me luck. What I've been doing in the past, I've been taking this dough, flip this up here so you can actually see me while I'm talking to you. Okay, what I've been doing is I've been taking this dough and I've been taking this container and putting it right back into that cold storage room overnight. And while I'm getting some pretty good bloom on it when it's done, it's not proofing hardly at all. So I'm thinking that because it's so chilly right here, that it should be fine. So I'm going to leave this on the counter. We'll take a look at it in the morning before I go to work when I make my coffee. And we'll see how, speaking of which, there's my coffee pot. We'll see how much it's come up and if it's come up at all. And if it comes up too much, then I'll go ahead and I'll put it in that back room while I'm at work, and tomorrow we'll bake this. But right now, that's it. So I mean, I really have probably about 20 minutes worth of work in this loaf of bread right now. Now we're going to let nature take its course, and we're going to let this bread dough do what bread dough does. We'll take a look at it in the morning before I go to work, and then we'll pop it in the oven tomorrow. Good morning. It's about 10 minutes to 3 in the morning, and I'm up having coffee and getting ready to go to work. I like how this dough seemed to rise up just a little bit. I think I'm going to take it and put it back in the back, though, because it's going to sit there until I get home from work at about 1 o'clock today, 1:15 this afternoon. So I am going to put it in, whoops, there's my finger in the way, knucklehead. I am going to put it in a cooler area, and it's pretty. I like it. It'll surprise you. Trust me, it's going to surprise you when it's done baking. Okay. We are at the next day. So a couple of things here. Those are my bread baking pans. Take the cookie sheet out. And I'm going to turn the oven on. Let's turn it to about 450, even though it goes much warmer than that. So I do not have a pan that will properly fit in this oven that I can close. And for the initial part of the baking, it needs to be sealed so that the steam rolls around in there and forms the crust on the bread. Now, for you guys at home, if you have a, where'd I put it? If you have a great oven at home, I don't know where I put it. You can use the Lodge cast iron pots with the lid, but make sure that everything on there is actual metal, that there's no plastic or rubber in there. And so you can use that at home, but I can't make that work here, so I use this. So I need the temperature in the oven, it's going up right now, to be at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And I need the pans to be at 500 degrees Fahrenheit so that it gets that initial burst of heat that will cause the bloom of the bread once it gets into the oven. And then it'll release all that steam, it'll form the crust, it'll just be beautiful. So I'm going to let the oven heat up, and I'm going to make sure that it's at 500 degrees for 30 minutes before I do the bread. I am going to need the loaf of bread and cornmeal. So I'll coat the pan with cornmeal, and I'll show you all that when it gets ready to happen. So right now we're just waiting for the pan to heat up. Okay, let's say we make some bread. I need to open this window though, because when that oven is on, I also need to turn the heater off. When that oven is on, this place gets toasty. The temperature right now is at 77 degrees in here. So there's our bread. And while it has risen some, it has not gone crazy on us. Hopefully you're going to be able to see all this. Let me get over here to the camera and see what we got going on. All right. Temperature where we need to be. Where did I throw the other one? There it is. Before I get started here, we should probably talk about scoring a bread. And that's not like on a scale from 1 to 10. Scoring a bread does a couple of things. First and foremost, it gives the bread a location for the gases to go as the bread blooms in the oven. So if you don't slice the top of this bread before it goes into the oven, the loaf will blow out in one location or another. But by scoring that loaf of bread, you're giving it an easy access to open up and vent. It's also the signature of the baker or bakery. So you'll see some really beautiful designs, but you won't see them here. Alrighty. Now I've heated both the top and the bottom pan up, but for our needs right now, the only thing we're interested in is the bottom pan. And I know they're going to cool down a bit here more than I would want them to, but I want you to see what we're doing here. Good old-fashioned cornmeal, right? I'm going to put enough down there at the bottom so that the bread doesn't stick. I'm also going to take a little bit of cornmeal. I'm going to sprinkle it up on top of here because this right here is going to be the bottom of the loaf. And then it gets a little tricky. With a banneton, it's a little bit easier than it is with a towel. But I am going to flip this loaf into that pan. And then I'm going to pull that towel away. Now, this loaf looks very small. Okay? Barely over the edge of that pan right now. At this point, I need to score that loaf. And I think what we're going to do this time is I'm going to score it right here. And you want roughly just a little bit more than a 45-degree angle. And you want a very sharp knife. A lot of people will use a razor blade for this part. All right, at which point I will take pan number 2, flip that up on the top, get my oven ready to go, and in. Now, I don't get a great seal on this loaf. I don't get a real great seal on this loaf using those two pans. You'll get a much better seal and a much better chewier crust by using the Lodge with the lid or an actual bread pan. They actually make bread baking pans. But I'm limited by the space that I have in here. So you saw what the loaf looked like when it went in. We're going to give it 20 minutes with the lid on. Right now it is 10 minutes after 3 because we always seem to do things at 3 o'clock here at Sean in Alaska. So I will look at this thing again at 3:30? Yeah, about 3:35 before I pull it off, and I'll give you a look at what it looks like then. All right, folks, before we get started here and I pull this bread out of the oven to see where we're at, I want to give a special shout out and a thank you to Doug and Shelly over at His Way Homestead. Commander Bacon got the hat in the mail today. Just joined you for a little bit of live video chat, showing the hat off, and love it, love it, love it. So if you guys want to see some really positive, real fun, real neat videos from a wonderful, wonderful couple, check out Doug and Shelly over at His Way Homestead. I'll put a link in the bottom for you guys to be able to get there. Again, thank you, Doug. Much appreciated, Commander Bacon. All right. We've been in the oven now for 20 minutes. I'll be honest with you. It's at this point where I actually find out if the bread succeeded or failed, right? Because I don't know yet. All you saw was an unbloomed loaf of bread in the saucepan, and it's a small saucepan. So now we get to find out if it worked. You ready? Let's see. Well, I'll be a son of a gun. We have a loaf of bread. It's still really, really, really on the soft side. Now it has to finish baking. So I'm going to take this loaf and pop it right back in the oven and let it finish, because the steam has done what the steam needs to do. And that loaf of bread is going to take anywhere from 15, probably 10 to 15 more minutes. I'm going to go more on the 15 side because I want a darker crust this time. I want a nice golden crust when it's finished. It's always a good sign when you see that, because you never really, I knew, I mean, you get to the point where you kind of feel your dough and you kind of understand what's happening with it, and you'll feel more comfortable with it. But it's a very, very rewarding process. The most rewarding process about this, though, is that you get to eat it when it's done. I spoke earlier about bannetons when I was making the bread, and I used the small saucepan. It's like a little quart and a half saucepan. It's really small. And the bannetons are not much bigger than this, but they bloom out nicer. I really wish that I could fit a decent sized pan in here so that I could get the loaf shaped banneton and I could actually make loaf bread, more like a longer French bread style bread. I love eating this. I love eating it way too much. This loaf was, ouch, that's hot. This loaf was made earlier in the week, and I devoured that whole thing so quick, it was ridiculous. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out of here. I will be back as soon as I pull this loaf out of the oven, and I'll show you how we're going to let it cool, and then we'll cut into it before the video's over, and maybe I'll have some dinner with it. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean in Alaska, and if you like what you're seeing right now, let me know. Leave a comment down below. And by all means, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. And if you like the content that you're seeing on the channel, do me a favor and subscribe. Great to have you along for the journey. So I cheated and cut this while it was a little bit warm, just so I would have some bread to go with dinner. But I'm going to slice this right down the middle. Went out and spent a little bit of money and bought a very nice bread knife. The reason why I'm cutting this right down the middle is so we can see what the inside looks like. There you go. Oh, it's just wonderful. Oh, it's so yummy smelling, so delicious tasting. Let's go over a few things here real quick. So this process took me 3 days to put this whole thing together. I could probably do it much faster than that, but there's no reason to. I have a total of about 25, 30 minutes worth of work into this bread over 3 days. So if I wanted fresh bread every single day, it'd be maybe 15, 20 minutes worth of work. And then I would be baking the bread that I made set up 3 days before every single day. So once you get on a routine and get a system down, it's very, very simple to do. The bread is much healthier for you than anything that you buy in the store. The only ingredients in this bread are the starter, which includes all the regular ingredients in the bread, except for the salt. So it's got all-purpose flour, it's got rye flour, it's got water and starter in it, and then a little bit of salt in there as well. To get a smoother bread, I rushed the stretching process. You actually probably want to stretch it a little bit more than I did, just to get that bread to stand up much nicer. This stood up very, very well. I mean, let me pull this up here for you and give you an example. So the pan that I cooked it in versus the pan that the bread rose in. Okay? This is what the bread rose in, and we cooked it in the other pan. And then the size of the loaf when it was done, it's bigger than the pan. It won't fit in the pan. I mean, it really just blows up. So a couple of tricks to get that to happen. One of them is to make sure that you do that long rest period at a colder temperature. In your home, you could use your refrigerator. And if you're going to use your refrigerator, you could basically, if you have a Banneton, you could put it in the Banneton and slice a Ziploc bag over it to keep it moist and put it in the refrigerator. If you don't, you could do what I did with the saucepan and put it in the refrigerator as well. Just wonderful, wonderful flavor. What I had for dinner with it, which you just saw before as well, was fettuccine Alfredo carbonara, I'm calling it. It's just fettuccine Alfredo with a 4-cheese Alfredo sauce, and then diced up some bacon, sauteed or cooked that off, threw it in there as well at the end, and then topped it off with Parmesan and Romano cheese. Just delicious, delicious. Sopping up those juices with this was just incredible. How long does the bread stay fresh? Well, if you don't cut into it, the bread will stay fresh for days. The crust on the outside of the bread protects the inside of the bread from drying out. If you cut into it, you're going to want to eat it in 3 or 4 days, but that's never a problem. If you've got a family, that's not a problem at all. In my case, what I do is I'll throw it, like I said, in a little Ziploc bag, but so it doesn't get too soft, I actually leave the Ziploc bag unsealed partially so that the moisture can escape out of the bag. But it is incredible. We'll go ahead and we'll whop another piece off there. And I'll show you a few things on the bread. Let me pull it up here. The bottom crust right here is from the cast iron skillet. Let's see if I get a little bit better light on it. Okay, the bottom crust right here is from the cast iron skillet. This top crust is from putting the other skillet on top. Your top crust will be much more defined than mine is, because if you're using an actual lodge pot or a bread pan in the oven, you'll get a better seal, and the steam causes this outside edge to become superheated and causes all the sugars to come up to the edge and form that crust. This is called the crumb right? Where you see the patterns and the holes in there. The more that you stretch this loaf out, the stronger this bread will become and the bigger the crumb will become as well. So the gluten will develop in the bread. This is not gluten-free. Could you make a gluten-free version of this? You probably could, but I'm not somebody who's ever worried about that. Again, made with all organic flour. The starter is organic as well, but there is nothing in this world quite as good as fresh baked bread and butter. And this is like my arch nemesis now because I just want to eat it and eat it and eat it. Let me know if you have a recipe for bread at home, and let me know how yours works out. I'd love to see some pictures. You can head on over to the Facebook page. The link is down below. Follow me on Instagram as well, but if you head over to the Facebook page and you want to send me pictures of your bread, I would love for you to do that, and I will go ahead and probably post them in a future video. So it'd be a ton of fun to do that. Like I said, let me know if you make this and what you think. Or if you have a recipe that is even different, better. It's got such a roasted, nutty flavor. It's unbelievable. It's better than anything you can buy in the store. And you made it yourself, which is even better. Thank you guys for watching. As always, thanks for hanging out. Clicking the thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, much appreciated. I just love to play around and do this kind of stuff inside when there's nothing I can do outside. Have a great day. I'm Sean in Alaska. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.